There are old photographs, seemingly silent witnesses of time. But if we look long and hard sometimes, they whisper things that history wants to bury. In 1937, a woman named Clara Freeman recounted her last memory of a key, a missing father, and a debt that freedom could never erase. Nearly a century later, a young researcher discovered the old photograph in the Charleston archives, and from there old shadows began to move again. A confession hidden in the ground, a powerful family guarding secrets with blood, and a trembling line on a map. The truth lies here. Tonight, join me in turning the pages of forgotten records where the past does not sleep and a small key can open the door to a crime shrouded for more than 150 years. Are you ready to hear the story Charleston has tried to forget? The photograph from 1869 looked perfectly ordinary until someone noticed what hid in the shadows of the girl's neck. The basement of the Charleston Historical Society always smelled the same, like old paper dampstone and promises that no one ever kept. Emma Jenkins sat beneath the flickering light, nursing a cup of coffee, gone cold as the scanner hummed beside her. For 3 long months, she had lived among ghosts, faces drained of warmth, soldiers in fading uniforms, families who stared straight through the lens and into eternity. Just 2 boxes left, she murmured to herself, lifting a yellowed photo labeled simply Plantation Family 1869. It seemed typical at first glance, a wealthy family seated on a porch, furniture dragged out for the occasion. The father stood tall and rigid behind his wife, one hand resting on her shoulder. 2 young boys in sailor suits flanked them like polished ornaments. But behind them, half swallowed by shadow, stood a young black girl, no more than 12, wearing a plain dress. Emma almost slid it into the scanner, but something held her hand still. The girl's eyes were different. Not the empty stare of the oppressed, but something alive, steady, unyielding. "Let's see what you're hiding," Emma whispered, adjusting the settings to the highest resolution. When the image sharpened on her screen, her breath caught. She leaned closer, her eyes drawn to the girl's neck. Beneath the softened grain of the photograph, something emerged, a faint, almost imperceptible mark. It shouldn't have been visible. And yet, there it was. "Dr. Reynolds needs to see this," she said under her breath, her fingers trembling as she reached for her phone. Hours later, rain drummed against the museum windows. Emma and Dr. Reynolds sat in silence before the glowing monitor. The director finally broke the quiet. 4 years after emancipation, he said slowly, This shouldn't be possible." Emma nodded, her eyes fixed on the mark. "But it's there, and I need to know why." The next morning, the director's office felt colder than usual. Dr. Reynolds examined the photo through a magnifying glass, his brow furrowed. "I've approved your research request," he said finally. 2 weeks? That's all I can give you." Emma nodded, her mind already racing. "I'll start with the property records. The photo came from the Harrison donation, right?" "Yes," Reynolds replied quietly. "But be careful, Emma. The Harrisons still hold considerable influence here. Their foundation funds half the museum's exhibits." Emma smiled faintly. This is research, not an exposé. But even as she said it, something in his tone unsettled her. That afternoon, she was surrounded by the scent of old leather and dust at the county records office. She traced the Harrison plantation Magnolia Grove through 4 generations, until it was parceled off in the 1920s. The 1860 slave census listed 47 human lives stripped of names and recorded only by age and gender. Among them, a girl of 6 years. By 1869, she would have been 12. Emma took photos of the brittle pages, then turned to the Freedmen's Bureau records. Hours passed in silence. At last, she found it a complaint filed in August 1868 by a man named Isaiah. His handwriting trembled across the page, accusing James Harrison of keeping freed people in forced labor. The investigation's conclusion was a single chilling word: unfounded. Outside, the Charleston heat pressed down like a wet cloth. Her phone rang, an unknown number. "Miss Jenkins," said a calm, cultured voice. "This is Thomas Harrison. I understand you're researching my family's history. Perhaps we should meet." Emma froze on the museum steps. How did he know already? The next day, she sat at a small table inside the Quad Tea Room on Church Street, a place that smelled faintly of bergamot and history. Thomas Harrison arrived exactly on time. Even before he spoke, she saw the resemblance, the same cool poise as the man in the photograph. "Thank you for meeting me," he said with a polished smile. His voice carried the weight of generations who had never been questioned. "Our family has always supported the Historical Society," he added smoothly. "I appreciate your time," Emma replied. "I am researching post-Civil War documentation concerning former slaveholding families." Thomas gave a slow, knowing nod. A delicate subject. And for the first time, Emma wondered if the thing hidden in that photograph had ever really been buried at all. The Harrisons. Thomas began, his voice measured like many Southern families had to reinvent themselves after the war. Not always gracefully. Emma slipped the photograph from her folder and placed it gently on the table between them. "This was among your family's donated items." Thomas glanced at it but did not touch. "My great-grandfather James Harrison and his household. Taken not long after he reclaimed Magnolia Grove from Union hands." He paused, his gaze flicking briefly toward the dark figure standing behind the family. "And the girl?" Emma asked softly. "A household servant, I presume," he replied too quickly. "Many freed people stayed on even after emancipation. Economic necessity." Emma tapped the photo with her finger. "I noticed something unusual on her neck while digitizing." Thomas took a slow, deliberate sip of tea. "Photography from that era is notoriously unreliable. Scratches, exposure errors, imperfections. This doesn't look like an error," Emma said quietly. For the briefest moment, the pleasant polish in his voice cracked. "Miss Jenkins," he said, eyes hardening. "What exactly are you suggesting about my family?" "I'm not suggesting anything," she replied calmly. "I'm researching history." "History," he said, "standing is rarely as clear as we'd like." He adjusted his cufflinks. "Some records at Magnolia Grove remain private. Family matters." The threat beneath his politeness lingered in the air as he turned to leave. "One more question," Emma called after him. "Who was Isaiah?" Thomas paused mid-step. His knuckles whitened around the handle of his walking stick. "Good day, Miss Jenkins," and he was gone. That night, Emma's small apartment was lit only by the yellow glow of her desk lamp. Papers sprawled across every surface. Maps, ledgers, census lists. She built a timeline from fragments, trying to see what history had chosen to hide. Magnolia Grove had been seized by Union forces in 1865 returned to the Harrisons by 1867. James Harrison had sworn loyalty oaths to reclaim his property. But the 1870 census still showed 17 black laborers living on his land. Not slaves, but not free either. Her email pinged. A message from Dr. Reynolds' access credentials to the museum's facial recognition database. Emma hesitated only a moment before uploading the enhanced scan of the girl's face. While the algorithm processed, she combed through old issues of the Charleston Mercury. Between faded advertisements and plantation notices, a small article caught her eye. November 1868. Negro man found dead near Ashley River. Injuries presumed to be result of misadventure or Negro quarrel. The name was missing, but she already knew who it might have been. A soft chime sounded from her computer. The search had finished. There was one match, a group photograph from 1880, taken at the opening of a colored school in North Charleston. Among the faces stood a young woman, perhaps in her 20s. The caption listed names including Clara Freeman, teacher's assistant. Emma's breath caught. Older, yes, but the same steady gaze, the same defiance. The girl from the plantation photograph had survived. And now she had a name. A sharp knock startled her. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a police uniform. Miss Jenkins, Charleston PD. We've had reports of suspicious activity in the building. May I come in? Emma hesitated. Something felt wrong. The hallway was too quiet. I can show my badge again if you'd like. The officer said patiently. She unlatched the chain, but left the door half open, studying his credentials. Officer Dwayne Morris, she read aloud. Sorry for the caution. He nodded and stepped inside, glancing around her small apartment. Neighbor reported someone trying door handles on this floor, he said. His eyes lingered a moment too long on her desk, covered in papers. Just checking each unit. Emma forced a polite smile. Well, I haven't noticed anything. She subtly shifted her position, blocking his view of the documents. You work at the museum, right? He asked casually. My cousin Marcus does security there. Night shift. Her stomach tightened. Oh, really? His radio crackled, breaking the silence. Well, looks safe enough, he said at last. Lock up after me. After he left, Emma's unease deepened. She called the Charleston PD switchboard, Officer Dwayne Morris. They told her had ended his shift 3 hours ago. Her pulse quickened. Someone was watching her. Within minutes, she packed her laptop, the photograph, and the essential notes into a backpack. By midnight, she had checked into a roadside motel under a false name, paying in cash. In the dim light of the room, she studied the photograph of Clara Freeman again. Something new caught her eye, a small pendant around the woman's neck, half hidden beneath the collar. Emma zoomed in. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a tiny iron key suspended from a leather cord. She searched census records until she found it. Clara Freeman, age 43, teacher, North Charleston. Listed in the 1900 census. She had lived into a new century. Perhaps she had written letters, kept diaries, or told her story to someone willing to listen. Many former slaves had been interviewed during the 1930s oral history projects. Maybe Clara's voice was among them. Just as hope began to flicker, her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. Stop digging if you know what's good for you. Emma sat in silence, the glow of the screen painting her face pale. Then she turned off the phone, her hand steady now, because some stories, no matter how deeply buried, refuse to stay quiet. The special collections room of the North Charleston Library carried that sacred hush found only in places where memory sleeps. Dust floated like pale ghosts in the morning light. Emma arrived at opening time, introducing herself softly as a museum researcher studying early post-emancipation education. Behind the desk sat an elderly black woman with gentle eyes and silver hair pinned neatly beneath a scarf. Her name was Miss Pearson. Clara Freeman, she repeated slowly. That's not a name I've heard anyone ask about in a long time. She disappeared into the archive stacks and returned minutes later with a slim grey box. We have a Works Progress Administration interview with her from 1937, one of the last collected before she passed. Emma's pulse quickened as she opened the folder. The paper smelled faintly of dust and ink. Clara had been 80 years old when interviewed, one of the last living souls born into slavery in Charleston County. At first, the transcript was simple, even warm. Clara spoke of teaching children, of founding a small school when few dared to dream of such things. But near the end, the questions turned personal. I was born on Magnolia Grove plantation, Clara had said. After the war, my father Isaiah tried to leave with me, but the master said we still owed debts. My father disappeared in '68. They told us he ran off, but I knew better. Emma's heart clenched. Isaiah, the same man who had filed the complaint in the Freedmen's Bureau records. I stayed until I was 16. Clara's words continued. What choice did I have? I was a child. But I kept my father's key just like he told me to. And then nothing. The interviewer's note ended the transcript abruptly. Subject became distressed and declined to continue. Emma looked up, her voice hushed. Miss Pearson, do you have anything else on Clara Freeman? Letters, personal effects? The archivist shook her head slowly. Those interviews were typewritten only. No artifacts survived. Then she hesitated, lowering her voice. But Clara Freeman has a great-granddaughter, Ayla Watson, teaches American history at the community college. Emma leaned forward. Would you have her contact information? Miss Pearson smiled gently. I can't give you that, but I can tell you Professor Watson teaches on Tuesdays and Thursdays in the afternoon. Emma caught the unspoken permission. Thank you, she whispered. Truly, outside the summer air felt heavy. Across the street, a black SUV idled with tinted windows. As Emma walked toward her car, it slipped into traffic behind her slow deliberate. Charleston Community College was a cluster of modern buildings and oaks heavy with moss. Emma waited quietly outside a classroom until the last students trickled out. Professor Ella Watson looked to be in her 60s, her dreadlocks streaked with silver, her posture calm but commanding. She was gathering papers when Emma stepped inside. Professor Watson, she began. My name is Emma Jenkins. I'm researching your great-grandmother Clara Freeman. The professor froze. Are you from the Historical Society? Yes, Emma said carefully. But this research is somewhat unofficial. As she explained what she had found, the photograph, the interview, the hidden mark, Professor Watson studied her in silence. Why are you really interested in my great-grandmother? She finally asked. Emma met her gaze. Because someone tried to erase her. And now, someone's trying to stop me from remembering her. Something shifted in the professor's expression, weariness giving way to resolve. "Come with me," she said. They drove together through quiet neighborhoods until they reached a small bungalow framed by ivy and wind chimes. Inside, the professor knelt before an old wooden chest and turned a brass key. "Our family history," she said softly. Clara left this for her descendants. She said it was proof of what really happened at Magnolia Grove. From within, she drew out a smaller wooden box. Inside lay a small iron key on a leather cord, the same pendant seen in the photograph, and a folded sheet of paper edges yellowed with time. This was written by her father, Professor Watson explained. By Isaiah. Before he disappeared, Emma's hands trembled as she unfolded it. It was a hand-drawn map of Magnolia Grove, plantation, and X marked near the river. In the margin, faded words whispered across the decades, "The truth lies here. The key unlocks more than doors." Professor Watson's voice softened. "My family has guarded this for generations, but we never knew what it meant. The plantation was divided long ago." Emma traced the river's curve on the map. That section is now the Harrison Wildlife Preserve. The old house still stands. "Be careful," the professor warned. "The Harrisons have protected their reputation for over a century." Emma hesitated. The mark on Clara's neck. Do you know what it was? Professor Watson looked away. Her eyes shadowed. Family stories say it was a brand. When they could no longer own her, they marked her instead. The words lingered like ash in the air. That evening, the Harrison Wildlife Preserve closed to visitors at dusk. But Emma had arrived hours earlier, blending in among tourists with cameras and bottled water. When the last families left and the gates clicked shut, she stepped off the gravel path, moving quietly beneath the drooping branches. Fireflies winked between the reeds as she followed the line of the old map toward the riverbank, toward the X Isaiah had drawn so many lifetimes ago. The dim light from her phone guided Emma through the dense foliage where Isaiah Freeman's old map pointed to an X near the strange bend in the river. The modern boundaries no longer matched the old terrain, but she recognized a few remaining landmarks. An old oak tree, perhaps young when Isaiah was alive. Then her flashlight hit a pile of rocks too neatly arranged to be random. Emma bent down, pushing aside layers of moss, revealing an old time-swollen cellar door. She had to use a branch as a lever to pry it open. The rusted hinges groaned like a lament. A cold, pasty awe poured from below. She stepped down, the flashlight flickering into the small cellar, empty except for an old iron box. Clara's key fit perfectly. Inside was a leather-bound book and an old newspaper clipping from 1868. The book was a record of human trafficking after the abolition of slavery, a secret system set up by James Harrison and other plantation owners to maintain their property through debt and violence. The newspaper clipping clearly stated the victim's name, Isaiah Freeman. His body bore the marks of torture that newspapers of the time had tried to hide. Emma photographed everything, her heart pounding. She had just touched evidence of a crime that had been hidden for generations. Then there was a sound above. Footsteps, voices, lights sweeping down the stairs. Miss Jenkins, a familiar voice, said, calm but cold as a knife, "This is my family's private property. Why don't you come up and talk?" Thomas Harrison. Emma held her breath. When he spoke of letting this go to protect the museum's funding, she knew the truth was at stake again. But this time, she didn't back down. She lied that all the evidence had been backed up and sent to multiple places, including Professor Watson. Thomas wavered. He had to let her go. A month later, in the quiet of the Charleston Historical Museum, Emma stood before the new exhibit, Untold Stories: Resistance and Survival After Emancipation. In the center of the large frame, a restored Harrison family photo, and behind them, Clara Freeman was clearly visible, her scar shaped like a lancet on her neck. Isaiah's key and map were placed in a glass case, the light shining on them as a final testament. Professor Watson stood by, whispering, "She was so much like my mother, strong even in the dark." Thanks to the notebook, many buildings named after slave owners were renamed a small but real justice. Outside the city of Charleston was still beautiful, still gentle. But in that sunlight, the past began to emerge, no longer buried. Emma watched the children enter the museum, their eyes curious about the stories that had been hidden. "What will you research next?" Professor Watson asked. Emma smiled. "There are still many old photos in the archives. Who knows? There might be something else waiting to be revealed." And in that moment, it seemed as if Clara and Isaiah's spirits were still somewhere out there, guarding the truth now that had come to light.